So I was having some conversations recently, especially with June 30th, which is Microsoft's year end. A lot of Salesforce deals kind of ramping towards the end, right? With July being a quarter end for them. ServiceNow, June 30th is Q2 close. I mean, there's other vendors as well, but I was having some conversations across all of these vendors with customers in the midst of their negotiations or finishing their negotiations around flexibility. Right, so we spent a lot of time talking about discounting and pricing and protections and investments that you should be getting from these vendors to drive adoption or get you to adopt and start using the products that they want. Of course, right now, AI is the big thing, whether it's Copilot or it's Agentforce or it's Pro Plus with the Now Assist for ServiceNow, so forth and so on. But what I was noticing is there was not enough time being spent around flexibility. And I've noticed that as part of that, there's been a lot of customers, not necessarily ones that we've worked with, but there's been a lot of customers that have kind of let go of the rope a little bit and or have believed with a false sense of confidence that they have flexibility. But the truth is, when you look at things more closely, when you start really peeling things back, when you look at the fine print, whatever phrase you want to use there is some flexibility, but is it sufficient? Right? So number one, swap rights, exchange rights. That's typically where you see this. Can you swap for everything in your portfolio? Or are there limitations? Can you only do it once a year? Does it exclude very specific things that maybe you might be interested in? Does it require you to maintain an annual spend? Likely it does. Is it been offered to you as a way to get around the fact that you've asked them to be able to drop your user counts or drop products? And did they say, hey, we can't do that, but we'll let you swap? Well, that's all well and good, but swap for what? What if you don't need more of what you already have? What, just to maintain an annual spend, i.e. keep paying for air? That's not flexible. But unfortunately, there's a lot of contracts that have that. Then you look at things like, I mentioned a minute ago, ability to drop, ability to downgrade, perhaps. So you go with all in E5. What happens if you want to move to E3? Do you lose discounting that was afforded to you? So you go to E3 list, which then not really strategic. Do you even have the ability to drop? A lot of times these vendors will cite revenue rec issues. Obviously, the remaining performance obligation numbers, the deferred revenue, the year 2, the year 3, 4, 5, whatever it may be, is incredibly important as they report to the market. So they're certainly not going to want you to drop in term. I understand Microsoft has a true down, so kudos to that. But what are the implications at renewal? Again, flexibility is really key, especially in today's world. And specifically, if you're willing to jump in on AI, if you're willing to give your vendor a shot, well, what happens if it doesn't do what it's supposed to do? These are new times even for the vendors as they build out these products. What happens? Are you carrying that? Don't even get me started with what happens at renewal. A lot of these renewal protections require you to even keep your upfront volume. So that's problematic. So I really just implore customers as they think about things, obviously the core pricing, like I said, protections, investments, making sure you have the right definitions in place, especially as you have more consumption-based products. Right, of course. But really make sure you're elevating the issue of flexibility, especially in today's world where AI or bundling or things of that nature, right? Make sure it's truly flexible. And if they push back, whether it's Microsoft, Salesforce, ServiceNow, it doesn't matter. If they push back on this, if they push back on the ability to drop, if they push back on having full swap rights, how about swap rights that include products you haven't adopted? What about a future pricing table for things you may be interested in downstream with discounting, not just list, and then allowing your swap rights to tap into that pool? What about that? They're going to push back on that. Well, why? Because they want to sell you more. They're going to push back on maintaining that annual contract value. Why? Because they won't need to maintain that. They need to maintain their ACV. They need to grow their ACV, not shrink it. But here's the question I'd be asking. What are you worried about? If your product does what it's supposed to do, in fact, you say it will, you put these ROI numbers up in front of me, so forth and so on, aren't we going to use more? Why would we drop? What are you worried about? Protecting revenue streams. I get it, you're a publicly traded company, but what about my needs? What about what matters to me? So these are the things, look, talking more about this, especially as the evolved consumption-based AI, as I mentioned, but don't let flexibility become just a catch-all throw in at the end. Make sure you have and have pushed this issue. And if they dig their heels in, if these vendors dig their heels in, make sure they have to say yes on a lot more things you're asking for to offset all those no's.